vehicles are over-designed for a vast amount of the time they spend running around in a city. You'd be surprised at the number of people who say, no, I've seen big cars and they're great, but they don't work for me.
So can I call you one of those persons who saw the India story coming through and hence...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Good day everyone and welcome back to Max on Mobility. I'm Maxson, your host, and with me today we have a very interesting personality. We have Vilas Deshpande, who is actually creating waves with his enterprise, which is Vayve Mobility based out of Pune. So Vilas, welcome to Max on Mobility.
Thank you, Maxson. It's so nice to be here today.
Right, so like I said, right, this is going to be an interesting conversation that we're going to have. It's about you, it's about what you're trying to create in the EV ecosystem. So first question first, from what I know about you, 26 years with Procter & Gamble.
That's right.
In the supply chain area, right? If I were to say
Indeed.
procurement, supply chain.
Indeed.
And suddenly you leave all that and you decide to set up your enterprise. So take us back to your journey and let's see how did you land up here in the EV space?
Certainly. So yeah, my life has been full of interesting changes. I grew up in Akola in Vidarbha. I came to UD City, now called ICT in Matunga, to get my bachelor's in chemical engineering. After that, I went to the US to get a master's in chemical engineering as well. And from there, I joined Procter & Gamble.
Okay.
And that was the start of that 26-year career. The interesting story there is I joined P&G in Japan.
Okay.
So from the US, I moved to Japan and I spent 5 years working for P&G there. My initial career was in a technical role. So
Okay.
I was in the process engineering space. And in that same kind of organization, I moved to the US and started working for the detergent business unit in North America. And along the way, then I said, wait, I am very interested in engineering, but I see even more interesting stuff happening on the commercial side. Mm-hmm. So I made a switch in my career from a technical career path to a business career path. And I changed over to strategic sourcing. I started my career in about 20 years ago now in that space. And then within P&G, I moved across multiple business units. Then along the way, I was interested in doing an assignment in India. So I had grown up in India, I had studied in India, but I had never worked in India. So I asked the company if I could have a role in India. So the company sent me to Mumbai to be the head of marketing purchases for P&G India. Okay. I had no prior experience in marketing, in brand building, and it was all learning on the fly.
Okay.
And that's one of the strengths that I got from P&G is to be able to jump into a new industry, into a new space, and just go and learn and apply the base skills that you already have.
Okay.
So after that role in India, which is really when I met my co-founders, which is what led to Vayve Mobility. That's a whole different story there. So after that role, I went back to the US. And again, a major switch. I moved into sourcing IT, hardware, software, and services for P&G employees worldwide. And I did that for a few years. After that, I switched another time to a very different business unit, which is on the paper category.
Okay.
So I was sourcing paper pulp, which is one of the largest commodities that Procter & Gamble buys for diapers, feminine hygiene products, and for toilet paper and paper towels. So that was a very different world altogether again.
Okay.
So if you see the thread from moving from that into automobile manufacturing in India, that's not such a huge leap.
Okay.
And it's kind of prepared me.
I take your word on it. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But so this is interesting. So I would want to reintroduce you as a person who's done 26 years of sourcing with Procter & Gamble in the detergent, personal hygiene, and all of that. And a person who's absolutely lived abroad, your professional career has been abroad. Correct. Largely. And you leave all that, come to India,
yes,
and you get into the EV space. So this is going to be interesting. So tell us that inflection point in your life when you decided, hey, listen, leave all that and get into the EV space. How did that happen?
It was a pretty large leap for sure, both on the professional side and the personal side.
Okay.
Professionally, I mean, literally, I'm at the peak of my career at Procter& Gamble. I'm ready to take on another major assignment in Cincinnati, which is where the global headquarters are. And this is during COVID. But I keep thinking back to two things. One is I have family in India. I have my mom, she is 92 years old.
Okay.
I have the rest of my older siblings here in India. And especially during COVID, I realized I want to spend more time with them. That's part A. Part B is there are so many amazing opportunities that I've had at Procter& Gamble. But there's always this thing about I really love one space where P&G is never going to go, and that's in cars. That's in building products like that.
Okay.
And particularly in electric cars. So my own journey in electric cars start back in 2015 when right after my assignment in India, I went back to Cincinnati and I wanted to buy cars for the family. At that point, Nissan had released the Nissan Leaf. And it was just out for just a few years at that time. So I mean, they work brilliantly. I still own them, by the way. And we still operate them back home in Cincinnati. But the range was just 100 miles. But I saw them for what they were. They were city cars for me. And they did their job brilliantly. I could go off to work, I could come back home, I could run errands all day long around the city. Because let's face it, a typical day of commuting for a person like me or for you, you'd be hard pressed to be driving more than 50 miles in a day.
Right.
Any longer, and then you'd probably want to question is like, what am I doing? Why am I spending more time on the road than doing something else or being with family or being more productive? So as a city car, those cars perform brilliantly. It's to a point where now for me, if I have to rent a petrol car, and I have to go to the gas station to fill up the car, it's a botheration for me. It's like, why? Why am I having to do this? So you have to completely shift your mind. And just like you'd never go to a fast charger for your phone away from home, you'll always have your phone charged at home, you'll carry it around the day, you come back, you charge it again, right? So it's that mind shift that needs to happen. But long distance travel needs fast chargers.
Right.
And for that was an initial constraint for us because we couldn't take the Nissan Leaf to go to Orlando or to go to North Carolina.
Right.
So ultimately, I broke down and got a Tesla Model 3. And that is a whole different level of experience for long distance travel.
Right.
Initially, when I would go long distance travel within the US, I would rent a gas car and I would stop along the way, but typically stop maybe 4 or 5 hours into a drive. Push yourself as far as you can go, end up at the destination super tired. With the Model 3, what it did for me is I didn't go for the super long range. My Model 3 has a 220 mile range. So it actually plots your entire trip for you.
Right.
And tells you, okay, you're going to stop at these 3 superchargers along the way. You'll stop for 12 minutes here, 18 minutes there, and 17 minutes at the last one.
Wow.
And these are perfectly positioned with all the amenities that you want: a grocery store, a coffee shop, a restaurant, a restroom. So when I now travel with that, I end up at the destination with a few more breaks than I would have taken with the gas car, but I end up way more refreshed and with full of energy when I reach the destination.
Got it. And absolutely, like you say, energized, but not with gasoline, with the with the EVs. But now this is where I'm just trying to understand you trying to build up Vayve mobility, right? From your experience in the EV space, for you to take, and this is going to be one important point for our viewers, is a person who's established himself, an Indian who goes to USA, establishes himself, working in the corporate space and then deciding to come back to India.
Yeah.
So can I call you one of those persons who saw the India story coming through and hence?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So my stint in P&G India really opened my eyes. I've been away from India. What I remembered about India was the old days of nothing worked, everything was hard to do. But then I saw that, wait, things have moved ahead. And because I was again in a strategic sourcing role, I got to interact with a lot of different supply chains across the country. And I was blown away by the things that were being done. And it also is linked to what I was able to achieve when I met my co-founders. So that's that little story there. So as P&G is one of the largest advertisers in the country. We are pretty active in the industry for media or for marketing.
Right.
And one of the things that the industry was doing at that time was to rebuild the television audience measurement system for the country, the TAM system.
Correct.
And I came in after the organization had been set up, and P&G essentially nominated me to add my expertise and experience there. So I worked kind of like a de facto chief purchasing officer for that little organization.
Got it.
And this is called Broadcast Audience Research Council of India, BARC, which is different from the other BARC.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we did at that point was we decided to build our own audience measurement system for the country.
Okay.
And that's a humongous task. It's a massive task because this is the largest television audience measurement system for the country. Nilesh and Saurabh, who are my co-founders,
Okay.
they were both in IIT Bombay at that time. And Nilesh had just finished his master's, Saurabh had finished his PhD. They were both in electronics design and really high-end communications networking.
Okay.
And they had started up a small company called Vayve Technologies at that time.
Okay.
And I was able to ask them, can you make this? And they were like, yeah, this is actually very simple, Vilas. We can build this in India. So
Awesome.
one thing led to another, to a point where then the board of BARC said, hey, let's have these guys produce a portion of it. They delivered so well that then the board said, well, maybe we should give them the whole thing to make.
Okay.
Once they did that production, this is an industrial IoT system.
Okay.
And very sophisticated hardware, but it was all made in India, built in electronics manufacturing facilities across the country. Once that was delivered, then the organization said, how about the software? Can it be optimized? And they said, yeah, there's a really good scope here to do that. So they did that. And around that time, I was already on my way back to the US. But then they continued working to a point where they managed the entire system for BARC. And that led me to really believe on what can be delivered in India with the kind of ingenuity, the engineering skills we have, now matching with the manufacturing capability that also exists here. So that's really what really built my belief in making things in India.
Awesome. So, Vilas, this is great. I mean, you come with so much experience, and now I see the build up to Vayve and the waves that you're making. So, tell us what's happening at Vayve. What's Vayve all about? And all co-founders are in Pune based? We
are all based in Pune now.
Okay.
So originally, Saurabh, Nilesh and Ankita were based in Mumbai. But at the peak of COVID, when we started this initial concept of doing something different, was to create an electric vehicle for Indian markets.
Okay.
And one of the first things that the team decided was the best place to do that is not in Mumbai, but in Pune.
Okay.
Because Pune is a major automotive hub. So literally in the peak of COVID, the team closed their leases on apartments in Mumbai and moved to Pune and said, we'll figure something out here. So there's a bit of intrepid kind of entrepreneurship here.
Oh, that's true entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
You jump off the cliff and then decide
then
how
you figure out how you land,
can,
right? So they set up their houses in Pune. Started off with a very small location in an industrial kind of setup, and said, okay, now we need to figure out what we need to do. And the concept was to build something for urban mobility for India.
Okay.
And this is a space that, of course, is served in a huge way by the two-wheeler market. But then when you look at electric two-wheelers, that's still a demographic of the country who can ride two-wheelers.
Right.
You end up excluding all the people that are not confident, or maybe they're elderly, or in many parts of the country, women are really not comfortable driving two-wheelers by themselves. So that's, in a way, ubiquitous in India, two-wheelers, but also it's not totally a uniform or encompassing way of mobility.
Right.
Then you step up to having a car. And a car, especially when you look at electric cars, now we are definitely in the world of electric vehicles. So
yes,
electric cars will typically start in the 10-12 lakh rupee range. And there's this huge gap in the middle. And that's that gap we wanted to address.
Okay.
So the concept is to have the right sized vehicles with the right choices on category, on the features, on the size of the battery, to make electric vehicles truly all-encompassing, make them accessible to as many people as possible, and provide the convenience and comfort of a car in a smaller form factor for personal use. Over the last decade, incomes have tripled in India.
Right.
So there's a lot of people, not just in tier 1, by the way, tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India as well, who are saying, I have a large car, it works well for a certain use case, but it's no good for me to go into the crowded market. It's no good for me to go look for parking. I need something more convenient, smaller maybe, but just as nice as my regular car. So this is the second car or the third car kind of a family in India who we truly believe is going to lead this revolution here, to say that, hey, I don't worry about prestige. I have a big car. I have all kinds of things I can show off with. But I now need to think about convenience. I need to be able to go to the market when it's raining. I need to be out there to do a quick errand or drop a kid to school when it is blazing hot outside. And I don't want to take the big car out. That is the use case that we are trying to address. So there's actually a very broad market for a vehicle like this. And the inspiration is not just here in India. This kind of a concept works outside India in multiple regions as well.
So, so now I get it. So that's the EVA we talk about, the personal mobility space.
Correct.
But I'm going to hold you here is the fact that since you already mentioned that this is typically not going to be the first car, if I were to say, right? This could be the second car. It's the convenience car, if I were to call it. But don't you think that's a very limited space that you're operating it is especially in a case like India, where the aspiration is for the second car, but typically the first car is what people end up with, and the one single car, especially given the kind of parking, etc. issue. So don't you think you are limiting yourself in that space?
We actually not limiting ourselves. What we are very cognizant of is when somebody buys a first car, they need it to do a wide range of things.
Okay.
They need to carry the whole family. They need to be able to go from Mumbai to Pune, for example. They want to show up in style, so they want a big vehicle, right? So electric vehicles today are able to do that, but at a pretty high price point. We don't want to go to that point. We want to operate in a place which is much more accessible by a lot more people.
Got it.
So that's why we start with this kind of a second vehicle concept. But that doesn't mean that there won't be people out there who will say, I don't need anything more. I don't need to show off. A small car is good enough for me. It's just me, my wife, and my kid in the family. Hey, we are good with EVA. So that will, of course, happen.
So this is where the interesting question to you would be. Let's say I'm a consumer, I'm a buyer, I'm a potential buyer of a vehicle. Other than the fact that from a use case perspective, I get it, that this could be my second potential car. And I know this fits in brilliantly. But other than that, what are my options in the market as compared to an EVA? And why should I prefer an EVA over anything else?
Certainly. So today, if somebody were to think about a electric car as a second or third vehicle in the family, they would look at probably as a starting level car. And there you would probably buy a Tata Tiago, or more recently the MG Comet was launched earlier last year. So those are the kind of choices that people make to get a quick city runabout, to do these little trips around the city and start experiencing the magic of electric cars. People typically want to take a small bet on a new technology first before they jump in with both feet, right? So that's where typically we see people operating. Why we would be better here with EVA, for example, is space. So EVA is designed to be a narrow vehicle. The narrowness is extremely important in crowded traffic and in parking. So literally we can park 2 EVAs in a standard RERA parking space.
Wow, this is interesting.
That really makes a huge difference on usability and the ease of adoption. You break down those barriers. अरे जगह नहीं है मेरे park करने के लिए मेरे पास, right? No, है ना बाजू में park कर देंगे कहीं तो. So that's the kind of use and ease that the convenience that we are trying to deliver.
Okay, so this is interesting. This is one vehicle everyone has been waiting for, really speaking. Especially people who are EV conscious are also road space conscious. I've realized that. So there will be a lot. So it automatically lends to a group of people who are sustainable, not only from an energy perspective, sustainable from a road space perspective. So wishing you all the best on this. the refresh launch of the EVA, I will be one of those individuals who would want to ride it and use it. And this brings me to the question about then what's more happening in the space of wave mobility other than this? Is this the only vehicle that you're working on, or how is it?
No, so what's going on is one of the other kind of questions that we got at the Delhi Expo was, great, you have a personal car, but there's a huge requirement for taxis, electric taxis in this country.
Oh, that's where the taxi story is all about. So tell us about it.
And what we have done is, because we are building, and we've done, we started from a scratch, a blank sheet of paper. So we have a platform that is scalable. So when we built EVA, we already had in mind a future pipeline of vehicles that could use that platform and create completely entirely new vehicles.
Okay.
And the first one after EVA is taxi. So you would have seen the post that I made where we have announced that we are bringing in a built electric, a born electric taxi to the Indian market. Okay. And this is intended purely for the intracity use.
Okay.
So in Pune, for example, I take a cab almost 3 or 4 times a week. And I live that every single day in terms of, okay, what works and what doesn't work for a vehicle, right? So number one, as a consumer, I want my fare to be as low as possible.
Right, right.
From the perspective of the driver wants a vehicle that gives him the least headache. And I say him because most vehicles are still male driver driven. That hopefully changes with more female participation in the future. But the focus is the driver needs a vehicle that's easy to drive, doesn't give him any maintenance headaches, is easy to charge in the case of an electric vehicle. Then, and easy to clean as well, by the way, and able to handle the little dings and dents that happen along the way on the road.
Right, right.
Then you have the fleet owner who says, well, actually, they just say one thing, paisa kaise banega? So they are looking for the most cost-effective vehicle that will have the highest uptime, that will have the highest life, and the lowest total cost of ownership.
Got it.
So we are solving for all of these things.
So Vilas, this is one interesting thing, or a couple of interesting things that I understood about the vehicles that Vayve is making. And I think you're kind of creating a new segment which people traditionally are not aware. And the second part is what you talked about is the solar panels on top of the vehicles. And I think we need to discuss it. So first tell me about the segment. So where does EVA lie? Where does the taxi story, if in this case?
Right.
So from a segmentation perspective, tell us about it. So how is it any different?
So maybe to answer that question, maybe I'll step back and say, let's start by looking at what is the job to be done here.
Okay.
The job to be done is moving people within a crowded city. And typically when we say city, it automatically means a crowded city.
Right.
That's the reality for us. Typical speeds at which vehicles go in the city, I mean, you're lucky to hit an average of about 30 kilometers per hour.
Right.
Usually you're crawling around at about 15, 20 kilometers per hour. Sometimes you hit an open patch and maybe get 50 or 60 kilometers per hour. But that's the range of speeds that a vehicle in the city usually goes. What happens is every taxi that is used in India, or even personal vehicles, are all certified at the M1 class.
Okay.
The M1 class is certifying for vehicles which can go on highways, which is 120 kilometers per hour.
Right.
So you already see here that vehicles are over-designed for a vast amount of the time they spend running around in a city. And especially when you look at a intracity taxi, that's all they do. Morning to night, or maybe through the night, they're driving within the city, all within these congested areas and speeds not exceeding, let's say, 60 kilometers an hour. The real value that we can bring, not just as for ourselves as a company, but to the industry and to society, frankly, is to use resources and use them in an optimal way for what they need to do. Okay. And so therefore, our focus is to create city vehicles which are built for those conditions and nothing more.
And which is not an M1.
And that is not an M1.
So what would it be?
So in the case of EVA, we are building it in the quadricycle category, which is an L7. Now the genesis of the L7 category comes from European conditions where these vehicles were created for exactly this, city travel.
Right.
Small distances, people wanting to hop with 1 or 2 people in the car from here to there. And that's the use case that we want to see happen. And like I said before, it's about optimizing the use of resources, less road congestion, less parking requirement, less power, frankly, because you can make a smaller and lighter vehicle, much more efficient with the use of electricity, far more kilometers per kilowatt hour.
So tell me about the. So let's do this. What is the spec of the EVA? Broad specs, like in terms of battery category, battery size, motor.
Sure.
So tell us about it.
And so I always like to describe the car from the consumer's perspective.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So as an industry insider, you get caught up in all the numbers, and I'll get to those. But
Sure.
from a consumer's perspective, we have designed EVA to be charged once and to have enough range for a week of driving around the city.
Okay.
So that translates to about 250 kilometers of real world range.
Got it.
That is delivered by a battery pack of about 14 kilowatt hours. And that's possible. And people are like, what? How can you get 250 kilometers from a 14 kilowatt hour pack, right? Because the vehicle is built for those requirements and therefore is much lighter. So the vehicle is, the curb weight is 550 kilograms.
Got it.
So that delivers an efficiency of a theoretical efficiency of about 20 kilometers per kilowatt hour. In real world range with AC on and everything, closer to about 15 kilometers per kilowatt hour.
I can see the supply chain thing coming at right now. The way you answered the question was also absolutely in terms of how optimize supply chain. End in goal, and then you build up,
Then
and
you
go.
build to what you need.
Got it. So that's what the spec of the vehicle is right now. And what is the kind of pricing that you, for the upgraded version, if I were to say?
For EVA.
EVA.
So we want to be in a place which is somewhere in the middle from where a premium electric two-wheeler costs and from where the entry-level four-wheeler electric vehicle costs. So in that middle range, I would imagine a starting point of about just over 5 lakhs. And then a fully loaded version of maybe 7 lakhs. So that's the range that we are thinking about right now. Of course, bill of materials are still being worked and
Sure.
we are a little bit away from production, but the target is in that range.
But then let me ask you from a very Indian perspective, right? Where the first car that I buy, in this case, may not be the first car or the second car that I buy. Still, there is a pride in possession, the pride in showing that I have purchased a big car,
Right.
Irrespective of the kind of price that you pay. The bigger, the better is what they say, right?
Yeah,
And in fact, India is a space where the SUVs are now starting to sell a lot more than the traditional car. And you're trying to go in the other direction and say, hey, listen, don't buy big, buy small.
Yeah.
Right? Buy to suit your needs, not to show your needs or wants, rather.
Wants, yeah.
If that is the case, do you think there could be a space outside of India rather than in India? And
Oh, absolutely. So I'll first answer that part of the question about India, right? It's amazing how a country evolves and how the young people in the country start thinking in different ways. So when we showed the car in Delhi, right, I was blown away by the number of people who said, this is what I've been thinking of and this is what I've been waiting for and this just makes so much sense.
Right.
So you'd be surprised at the number of people who say, no, I've seen big cars and they're great, but they don't work for me.
Sure.
So there are going to be tremendous number of people who will say, "Choti gaadi hai, mujhe chahiye."
Okay.
So that is coming.
Yeah, you're taking a very contrarian view, but I wish
we are.
Yeah.
And I think it will come more and more true because as society evolves, you start thinking about what do I make all this money for? Do I make it to show off to my neighbors or is it for my own comfort?
But isn't that a very first world kind of view where things are evolved, unlike in India? And I'm just trying to...
Yeah. And I think very strongly that India is already on that path.
Okay.
So that's why I have such confidence in the country. That's why I have such confidence in the maturity of our consumers in the country.
And you believe that?
And remember, I mean, in India particularly, maybe past generations, maybe our own generation, right? We've grown up valuing things and not wasting.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though somebody may be hugely rich, that still is back in the mind somewhere in that society or in that upbringing that they had. So let's not discount that because that is a huge benefit for the country ultimately. Because the less resources we need and the less resources we waste, the more we can apply towards growing ourselves as a society.
And talking about resources, this is for someone to be coming out something with a product and especially a vehicle which is very contrarian to what people think of, and then adding another element, which is the surprise element of solar on top of a vehicle. And not many people would be aligned to those things. So you need to, for a lot of non-believers out there on solar, what's your pitch out there for having solar panels on top of a vehicle?
Certainly. No, and it's a very interesting discussion. So first, I'll again go back to the consumer response.
Sure.
People loved it. People are like, "Arey yaar, ab tak kisi ne kiya kyun nahi hai ye?" And there's a good engineering and technical reason why.
Okay.
The conversation continues in part 2 of the podcast.